It is not well known that Master himself was an educator, not just a meditation and yoga teacher, but a teacher of children. And he had a school in Ranchi. You can still go there and you can see the school. It was very, very well received even before he left for America. And do you know, he was an educator in his 20s. And it was during those years that he got all these wonderful accolades from people who knew about education. He was 27 only when he left for America. And to me, education for life is what brought me to Ananda. I don't find anybody else in Ananda who said that, but for me, I found it was so exciting to find the book. And this is the book. Some of you may have seen it at the table. I would highly recommend it for anybody at all, but especially those of you who are parents and teachers, because it is very, very deep. I find it just like the autobiography of a yogi, because the more you read it, the more you say, I didn't read that before. How did that get in there? But it's very, very deep. And even though I taught sociology at a college level, and originally the book was written for teachers of younger children, I said, oh my goodness, either these are principles and practices that I had already found somehow, or they were ones I had not thought about. And I found that even though it's written for these teachers of younger children, it was just as applicable at college, and I wished that I had had it when I started out teaching many, many years ago. Now, I want to let you hear from Gaurja because she's going to need to get back out with the children. She's running children's activities. You may have noticed that right next to the EFL, we call it EFL, next to that table, there are children's activities today, and she's very much involved with them. So let me let you hear about what it was like for her to go to America in her senior year of high school. That's right, isn't it? Senior year, to our high school in Ananda Village as a student, then go on to college. We had a college and we're retooling it, and then to be trained as an EFL teacher, because before I say more and get into the whole thing about children's preparation through EFL, through our various activities to train meeting life's challenges, the schools that we have, and we have about 7 throughout the world, not too many high schools, but several of the other schools, it will set the stage. You will get a better feel by hearing from Gaurja.
Hello, everyone. So I went to Ananda school when I was 17, and over there, the whole experience was very different from a typical school in India. It was very different from my typical Indian schooling. For one, the class sizes were very small. We were 10 to 12 students in one class, and so we each got individual attention from our teachers. And then we started each class with 5 minutes of calming ourselves, centering ourselves, focusing our energies, and then going ahead with the topic. So that was very different. You know, in schools in India, we don't really do that, even though it's part of our culture to use yogic philosophy in teaching. Anyway, so then another thing which was different was whatever we studied in class as theory, we would the teachers would teach us how to actually do those things in the science lab or out on the field. We had a class with making fuel, alternative types of fuel. So we made biogas and biodiesel, and we made a windmill. These were all practical applications of what we were learning in school. And the teenagers, I was 17, so falling into that category, we were taught how to earn part of our tuition. Every year we had a study abroad program. So we would go to different, the senior students would go to different places. They would choose a place, and then everybody had to, the 12th graders I'm talking about, everybody had to earn part of the amount which was going to be needed to take that trip. And that was a very good experience in taking that responsibility on ourselves. And another way in which it was very different was some classes were combined. So like 6th and 7th graders might be together, or 4th and 5th and 6th might be together, because there was a system where the elder students would help the younger ones. And that kind of interaction really created bonding amongst the children, and they grew stronger in their subjects. And it was just overall very, I'd say, smart and intelligent way of going about it. Of course, the teachers were there too, but that student-to-student interaction was very helpful. So my overall learning experience at the Ananda school was very nice, and I really enjoyed it. Going on to college, we were taught all the main principles that Swami Kriyananda outlines in the book Education for Life, and how to put them to practice in our day-to-day schedule. And we even had an internship period where we got an opportunity to practice what we had learned as part of the training. So now, therefore, I'll just briefly talk about something called flow learning, which is a system where it's how we design our lessons in Education for Life. So we begin with an awaken enthusiasm activity, which is getting the children's energies up. Usually, it might be 2 o'clock, it might be 1 o'clock, but they get tired by that time. So nobody, or like the children are lazy. There's all kinds of things which can happen when you're trying to teach children. They're not that interested or bored. But this kind of a lesson really addresses all those things and changes the direction. So with the Awaken Enthusiasm activity, we engage their energies. We bring out the energy. Maybe they'll do a Awaken Ready exercise, or get them to do something which involves their bodies. Then the second part of the lesson is focusing their attention. We get them to think about something really intriguing, something that really interests them, or make them do a yoga posture which requires them to be calm and focus their energies and try to concentrate on one thing or one point. The third part of the lesson is direct experience, which is about making them do the main part of the lesson, and then giving them a practical side to it, of it also. So they get to actually, so like I had mentioned before, the practical aspects of each lesson, they are included in the whole schedule. And then the last part is sharing inspiration, which is really important, because then everybody sits in a circle and they share with each other what inspired them during the lesson or during the whole flow of the day. They get to listen to each other and appreciate each other about what lessons they learned. And so that's again a very important part of the flow learning that we carry out in EFL schools. And right now I'm teaching in the Vibgyor High School in Magarpata, and it's a private school and it's got its own ways, own set of ways how to teach children. But some of the things that I do sometimes with children include making them stand up, because all day they are in school and they get only a 15-minute break to go on the ground and run around, which I make sure they do get every day. But one of the things I make them do is stand up, do some running in place, do some exercises, do some affirmations. There's a very powerful affirmation. It's called, I am positive, energetic, and enthusiastic. So that I make them do, and so they're able to feel more energetic while just before they're about to study. I try to teach them conscious discipline, which is a way of solving out our differences with each other. So, instead of just making them feel guilty or shouting at them for doing something wrong, we try to make them talk to each other. Let's say there's a fight between two students. Talk to each other, listen to each other, create understanding, and not ignoring those moments just because of lack of time. Usually teachers here in the schools, they're time pressed. They have to get something done in a certain amount of time, and they don't have time to solve out. But in EFL schools, how I've learned, how I've been trained is to really get them to solve their differences and move forward in a harmonious way. And And last but not the least, I've been taught that as part of my EFL training that children are bundles of energy and they really need to express that energy. And if you don't give them useful channels, productive channels to engage their energy, then they get into negative behavior or laziness. It could go either in the extreme Rajasic, which is with negative behavior and a lot of just uncontrolled energy, or it could go down with the Tamasic, which they don't want to move, they don't want to write, So helping them through that and giving them creative ways to spend their energy, even if it's related to the lesson or if it's not related to the lesson, but something to keep them going, then that helps very much. That addresses the issue of their energies. Anyways, I hope that was helpful for all of you to know. And if you have any more questions, then please feel free to talk to me. I'll be right outside at the children's booth. Thank you.
I think we better skip this song.
Okay.
So by hearing Gaurja, one of the things that she was really focusing on is how teachers understand and use energy. If we can do that, and parents, it is doubly important at home. Because if we understand energy and how the children use it, how we can influence it, and how the children's energy interacts with ours, then behavior management is not a big problem. We also talk to the children as equals. Now, does that mean that we step back and just say, anything you want to do, honey, is fine? Oh, no, because we have to guide them. But we respect them. They are souls. They just happen to be little bodies. But we remember we were too, and we are part of a big chain of life that goes from being in those little bodies to being in the ones we're in now, and now we have little ones to guide, and they will too. It's all a beautiful chain. Whoa. So that gives you, I think, a feeling for the schools. Incidentally, we have tried on a couple of occasions to start schools in Gurgaon and here, but it just wasn't the right time. And now we're hearing quite a few parents are saying, could we have a school, or do you think someday we might? The answer is definitely yes. I think the time is coming. I don't know that it's here this year. It may be. We may start more activities for children. We do have some, but we can certainly do more. Maybe some after-school programs. And as we get the traction going, then it will be more of the time. But I'll take you through a couple of visuals once we get our computer back up. It needs some awake and ready exercises. Come on. Not too many, though, because I want to show you some wonderful charts, life skill action charts. This is how Ananda now, in the last few years, has been moving to working with children to facilitate the development of skills that will serve them for life. That's why we call them life skills. We think, by the way, of life as a school. This is something that always appealed to me, and I was so happy when I saw that Master and Swamiji had felt the same way. Life is a school. We do not end our schooling just when we graduate. But maybe you found this out too. Come on. Well, I might not be able to. Gaurav, can you? It's Amit's computer. I did press it. I did.
Maybe it's out of battery.
Okay, I think it's on. The subtitle of the book that we call our EFL Bible is Preparing Children to Meet the Challenges. So when we have a challenge, like right now, which I think is over, we do our best not, oh good, but I think it's okay now. Yeah. We do our best not to get flustered, but rather stay centered, which is something that we are teaching in the meditation classes anyway. You see, it's all of us, all the same. So I'm going to move on quickly to give you a couple of other insights into education for life. You know it's based on the insights of Yoganandaji, but also when Swamiji met Dr. Kalam in about 2006, Dr. Kalam was really excited. He said, "It is just what is needed in India today." These are some of the benefits. I think you've got the idea through hearing Gaurja, but perhaps you didn't pick up so much that there isn't really stress. All this test taking that happens here, 10th and 12th standard especially, where everybody, including moms and dads in the family, get flustered, it just isn't there. We can teach, we can learn without that kind of stress. It is not necessary. In fact, it's really unhealthy. We talk about dealing with tests as simply more challenges. And when you're trained to deal with challenges, then you look on it in a certain amount of joy, even like, let me show what I have learned. Just like athletes. I used to follow ice skating a lot, and I was really excited to see when the ice skaters finish their competition, they always go to where the trainer is waiting for them, and then together they wait for their scores. And you just see what the trainers have done with those skaters over the years. They hug each other, and they usually accept what the score is, usually, not always, but usually, because they know what to do. And if they did those things, then they know pretty much what score they're going to get. And if they didn't do as well as they thought, well, there is another competition coming. Balanced learning. When tests are given, standardized tests, our students come up in the top 5% usually. In one year, they came up in the top 1% nationally. So when people say, well, can these schools do things besides just have a good time, let the students have some fun with their learning? Can they really learn? The answer is, we'll show you our test scores. And just a few of the principles. The educational goal of EFL is maturity. That is something Swamiji himself came up with, because maturity is the ability to relate appropriately to realities besides one's own. I take into consideration what you're thinking, like when you heard Gaurja talk about how she's working with children in fights. Well, that is how the EFL schools themselves deal with fights. And so I can begin to understand, why did you do that? And then I'm not quite so mad at you, and we can work out ways to go ahead together. Don't want to go too much into all of this. If we were presenting, like my colleague Gayatri and I go to schools very often, or parents groups, and explain a little more in depth about EFL. But this is mainly just to introduce you to the idea of how we prepare children to meet challenges. But I would like you to just look at this. The stages of maturity. We say that children are divided according to chronological age into years that are 6 years in a set. So the first are the physical years. That's when they're learning how to simply walk and to be coordinated, tie shoes. And the whole thing they're learning is physical energy and control. The next 6 years, they're learning how to deal with emotions and how to think emotionally. When we teach children in those years, then we like to appeal to their feelings a lot. We don't stop training them with physical coordination, but we would give them an opportunity to explore how they feel about what they have just learned in terms of feelings. Or we might teach heroes and stories. Kids in those years love stories, and they're often about people that are ones that we would care about what they did. Then the will years, or willful years, now the time has come for competition. They love to get medals and show off. And that can be very healthy. It sounds egoic, and it is, but we train the ego. And so we, at that point, help the children to learn how to work with the ego and not to say, you were bossy, you were, you. Because the children at that age, they get a little frustrated that they don't get a chance to show what they can do. And now, the last years are the intellectual years. That would be 18 to 24. Unfortunately, in schools, not just in India, but in America, and I think probably all countries, we have so often taught children as if they were in those intellectual years at a much earlier year. And so that's when you have the teacher sitting at the desk. We call that the sage on the stage. I know, and I'm going to put all my knowledge into you as a sponge or a pitcher, right? And that doesn't work, and that's why we have had so many frustrated kids, and especially if they do not know how to be centered. All these suicide rates that are so sad. We don't want in EFL, we don't want anywhere that the intellect is catered to at a too early age. Of course, we deal and we sharpen the intellect at the younger years, but we do not teach to the lower standards the same way as if they were at a higher one. We have tools of maturity, which are ones that we want to use at each stage. And so what does a child want to do most when he's in the earliest years? Well, move, and then feel, and then accomplish, and then learn, in that order. Now, this is the one that we'll jump off from and talk about in terms of how we train in EFL for dealing with challenges. You have here 3 balloons, and if you could try to visualize them, one at the bottom, like iron. It's a balloon, but the balloon can't fly. It's weighted down, heavy, tamasic. Really, heavy is another word for tamasic. We just, or I shouldn't say we, Master and Swamiji used that breakdown of tamasic and ego-active and light. Now, those are the same ones that I'm just talking about here. Let's see, what are they? They're heavy is tamasic, ego-active. What's the middle one? Which one? I'm not getting it. Do you know, suddenly I'm getting the 2 things mixed up. They are the same, but as far as the names, Sattvic is at the top. That's light in the way we talk about it in specific gravity. Is ego active? No, that's not the word in Rajasic. Thank you. Yes. So tamasic at the bottom, then Rajasic, then Sattvic. That's what this breakdown is. And so the child who is acting heavy, this is sometimes related to things that are going on at home, sometimes within the child, maybe physically or mentally. Sometimes it's a bad day, but very often we find kids coming to school, at least when we're talking about outside of Ananda. We try to choose children for the schools that we think would really profit, and their families too. And we don't usually have heavy children, that is, as a real stage. But unfortunately, we find them a lot outside. And if we have a lot of heavy children in one class, that is quite a challenge for the teacher. Ego-active or Rajasic, actually, this is a good stage. It's just we want to get them going further up. We don't want them to stay there. We do want to bring the heavy children up to ego-activeness, and we want to bring the ego-active child up to light, or Sattvic. But we do not punish them if they're in the heavy stage. We just find ways to work with them. And incidentally, the way that we do our, if you want to call it punishment, or reward in Ananda is to give them motivation that picks up on giving them a chance to avoid pain or to get a reward. And everything in our whole punishment and reward system boils down to avoiding pain and having pleasure or joy. You remember Nayaswami Devarshi was talking about that this morning. So it's the same. So what do we do to help the children to move up? Well, we give them opportunities, like, for instance, the ego-active child maybe does need a chance to shine. And I saw it the other night at the center. There is a child who sometimes needs a little more reward than you would imagine. And he was given a reward to cut the cake. And he loved doing that. He's a lovely child, lovely family. But it was very clever of Nayaswami Aditya to do it with him that way. And very soon, I'm sure he'll be moving up to light. Okay, now, what do we do specifically to help children to gain skills? Well, what we used to do before we developed Nitai, some of you met Nitai, I think, in the fall when he came. He's the principal of the first school of Ananda. He worked very closely with Swami Kriyananda when he was writing the book on education for life. And what he would do, and what he encouraged the teachers to do, would be to simply learn or help the children learn from what was going on in the class. So he loves to tell a story. Any of you remember the snowball story that he told about what happened one day when it snowed and they built snowmen, and then it deteriorated and they began to throw snowballs back and forth, and one of them hit a kid and he began to cry. You remember that story, anybody? No? Or maybe you weren't there. Well, you heard just now what happened. So what did Nitai do? Instead of saying, "Bad kids, you all got to come in," he said, "Might be time to go in, let's go." So they all came in, and he had them talk about not the snowball fight to begin with. He said, what did you enjoy about going out in the snow? Well, they said, we built snowmen, we lay in the snow, and we did this, and that makes angel in the snow. We loved that. Now, what about the snowball fight? Well, they just sort of sat there. They didn't know what to say. He said, was that enjoyable? Well, okay, it didn't seem like it was. Why wasn't it? So little by little, he was able to tease out of them, not saying, see, you did this, it didn't work, that was bad, very bad kids, you won't have any recess. No. Little by little, they began to say what they had found that wasn't working. And what wasn't working? Well, of course, somebody got hurt. That didn't feel good. And did you feel good throwing the snowballs? No. You see. And what did they learn was from their own experience. Experience is at the basis of what we do in EFL. That I think we glossed over a little bit earlier. So that is still done. That is very much when you have the what we call teachable moment, and you have things that don't work well, or that work well. Either way, you can stop and have the kids look at it, reflect on it, and see how is it going. By the way, how much time do we have? What time do we stop? Is it 3:30? I think it is. Okay. Okay, good. This is very good. Now, we are still doing that. We encourage, we train the teachers how to work with the children to get them to say what is working and not working, or what they have learned, what they find of value. But now what we're doing is we have these action charts. I have about 4 good sets and 2 that are not. And what I'd like you to do is, would you come up and get into little groups of 3 or 4 so you can see them? Just, you can turn your chairs around. I think we have about 16 or so people, so we should have enough for at least 4 groups. Could you do that? Come up, make a little group. Now, if we have more than 4, then I would like you to form a new group. So only 4, 3 or 4 in each group. What you have in the sets here, you have 15 skills. These are not, I'm sure, by any means the only skills that we should train. I can think of a few more myself. But these are the ones that Nitai came up with. And every one has an animal, a bird, an insect. I think those are the only categories on the front, which he feels somehow epitomize that skill. Now, why does a whale epitomize truth? I do not know. I've asked him. But anyway, and we may change them for India because we know that, even though I am a cat lover, we know that cats are not necessarily all that popular in India. So the cat, which is on one of the other charts in India, may be changed. We welcome feedback as to what animal or bird or insect you think should go on each of the charts. And you have a yoga pose. What he's done is he's taken one of the Hatha yoga poses and renamed it. So for the whale, for the truth, living truth, he has what he calls the truth pose. And then there will be at the bottom a quote. And it is not necessarily from somebody spiritual. This one is. It's from Buddha. 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. But here's something, let's see here, something from one of our American presidents, Abraham Lincoln. This is the one on choosing happiness. A person will be just about as happy as he makes up his mind to be. And choosing happiness, I love this title because it shows we have choices. That is what preparing children for the challenges of life is all about. It is to help them realize that they do have choices. And I do not have to be miserable just because I did not get chosen for the team I wanted to be, or I didn't get the gift I wanted, or somebody looked at me like this today. It doesn't matter because I have much more inside. Okay, so now you know about the front of the card. Now, if you turn it over, and each of you can have one to look at, you will see at the top there is a little bit about how to use the card in general. Then there are life skills activities for this particular skill. So, let's go back to living truth. There is something about speaking. What is that skill that we're going to develop in the coming week, if we choose to do it? These are all activities that we have a choice of which ones to work on in the coming week. Okay, this one would be to say what you feel is true while being sensitive to others. Choose silence when in doubt. Does that sound like a skill that maybe we as adults could work on? I think. But it's one that we would work on with the children. Now, does this sound like a 3 or 4-year-old could do it? Probably not. But it certainly is one that a little older child could do. And that reminds me to say that even though as a parent or a teacher, I might pick what I want the child to do because I think I know the child and his needs or her needs. But an older child, I see some children out there who are very mature, and I wouldn't hesitate for a minute to give them all these cards and explain how to use them and let them work themselves. They really love to do it. We have had a lot of feedback now from the children in several countries. because we have schools in 2 European countries as well as here, and we're selling the charts to people in many other countries. So you see, at the life skill activities level, there are 6 that parents or the older children could choose. Now, how do we use this chart down here? This is the action chart. And let's say I decided for my child that I want him to work on speaking truth, because he does fib a little bit. So I'm going to encourage that first activity, and I'm going to put a check there because that means I chose it to work on with him for the coming week. And let's say listening to, my child doesn't listen all that well, my child in class or my child at home. And this one is have a friend tell you a story that's partly true and partly false. See if you notice any changes in body language or tone of voice when they aren't telling the truth. Well, that one could help the child who doesn't tell the truth always to be a little more alert, being aware that, hey, maybe when I don't tell the truth, people can tell. So anyway, I picked several. It's up to me as the parent or teacher or the child who is older and working on these as to which ones. So there will be a few check marks down here. It could be all of them, or it could be, see the last row here is blank. That means you could put one in that comes to you. So you have freedom to add to it. Now, how do you use the chart? Okay, let's say also I have put a check mark for Monday. Let's say I had put a check by speaking, going to work on that. Then I'm going to put how many times during the week I will work with my child. So let's say I have said 3 times. I put 3 in this first square here in that row. And I go down the list. I do listening and whatever others. And let's say I came up with a activity of my own that I liked, so I have put a check mark by that. Now Monday comes, and we are going to work on speaking the truth on Monday. So if I did that, I put a check mark. Let's say I said 3 times, okay, maybe Wednesday and Friday. So I hopefully will end up with 3 times because I said that's what I wanted to do earlier in the week. Sunday night, by the way, is a very good time to do this if you're at home. During the week with the children, it might be Monday morning, could be any time. And let's say then I do the same for all of the activities that I said I was going to work with. Now on Sunday night or Monday morning, I look and see, did I get all those activities done the number of times that I said? Let's say for speaking, yes. Let's say for listening, though, for some reason, no. Maybe the child was ill. Maybe the child was very busy working on some other things. There could be good reasons. If not good reasons, then I say, well, what happened? And at that point, after I evaluate how it went, and I would talk, even though I, as the parent or the teacher, said which of the activities that I wanted to work with, I will ask the child, how do you feel? Did you feel good about what you did with speaking? Yes. Okay. Well, do you want to try this again next week? You could ask the child, the older child especially, how much value you found in doing this, and perhaps we will do it again next week, or perhaps we'll go on to another one and come back later. And what's happening is the children are feeling really good because who teaches them this kind of thing? Now, I do remember myself at a Catholic school I went to for a few years that they did a little bit of this. Or it was more that they evaluated us. They didn't give us as much training in how to do the skill. But I am used to having a little report card based on skills. So from an early age, I personally was acquainted with the value and ideas of how do you plan that you'll train the children. But I then went on to other schools where they didn't do it. And I often, as an adult, began to think about certain skills I noticed I didn't have, and I wish that somebody had trained me. And the kids that we're asking to tell us how you felt about this, they are telling us we are grateful, especially when they move on they graduate from school, our schools, or they go on to things in life like their first profession, and they see that other kids are not able to do these skills. They get all rattled, or they get mad easily, or they do not know how to work with others. They don't tell the truth, and that is a problem for working teams. You see the value. So this is what we're doing now in Education for Life. We're still working, as I mentioned, with the teachable moment, like when a teacher sees something going on that the students can learn from, then we'll try to stop for a minute and talk about it. But we have this exciting new way of doing things. So it is coming up toward the time that we have to stop here. I will be out at the Education for Life table. If you would like to come out, you can also purchase these, although what I found is they're missing an important guide, the parent-teacher guide, and so we're going to have to, I think before we sell them, we're going to have to find out where they went. But if you'd like to put your name on a list to get them, you certainly can. And if you'd ever like to have my colleague Gayatri and me come to either a school or someplace where you want to have people hear about this kind of thing, we're always glad. Here are some brochures and a calling card, visiting card. And I hope you have found this helpful.